Okay, let us begin. Okay, so the book of Exodus is a continuing story. If you remember in Genesis, God makes a covenant promise with Abraham, and he promises him a seed as big as the stars of the heaven, a numerous seed. He promises to be their God to them, and he promises them a land of their own. That is the main message of the book of Genesis, that God made a covenant with Abraham. But in so, he also warned them of a sad time that was coming. He says in Genesis 15:13, the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in the land that is not theirs, and will be servants there. And they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions." So the story of the book of Exodus is actually foretold in Genesis. We knew that was coming. Towards the end of the book of Genesis, we have providentially Joseph is sold into slavery. He's moved to Egypt, and we know that that was God's kindness to save Israel from a 7-year famine that was about to happen. So the story of Genesis ends with all of Israel's family, 70 people in all, moved into the land of Egypt. Now, when you turn the page to the book of Exodus, about 350 years have passed between when Israel enters Egypt and when Moses is born. And during that time, a lot has happened. There has been a lot of kings that have changed places. There was a period of time where there was pharaohs called the Hyksos that were non-native Egyptians. They took over for 100 years. If you're wondering, that would probably be what the Egyptian king who did not know Joseph. Why he would not know is because they were foreign invaders who took over for just over 100 years. And Israel is suffering. They're in slavery. They're not having a good time. I want us to first just take a moment to actually picture, because we know the end of the story. We know that they're going to go out gloriously. They're going to go to Mount Sinai. They're going to get their land. But I want you to picture what it actually feels like for Israel during that time. You know that your forefathers heard promises from God. They could have a land, that they would be blessed, that God would be their God. But all you have known your entire life is suffering. God has been silent. God promised to be your God, yet you're just in cruel slavery. God promised you a land to your own, and you are captive in the land of Israel, in the land of Egypt. It would be very easy to understand the hopelessness. And we do know that Israel was crying out, and that's what led to the Exodus. We read here in Exodus 2, the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. He heard, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God was not silent after all. He had not forgotten about Israel. He was aware of their suffering. And it was just in his providential time that he was going to free them from slavery. That is where the book of Exodus begins. A quick synopsis of the book would be the main storyline is how God delivers Israel from slavery in Egypt to fulfill his covenant promise to Abraham. That's what the whole storyline of the Bible is about. God's not doing things arbitrarily or randomly. He is a covenant-keeping God. He is keeping his promise to Abraham. He makes a covenant with Moses and Israel on Mount Sinai and teaches them how to be his holy people. And then God's presence is restored among them in the tabernacle. Now, just like the book of Genesis, the author who wrote it is Moses. We see that numerous times. I've put up 2 references there on the screen that show that Moses was the author. One of them in Exodus 34. And the Lord said to Moses, "Write these words, for in accordance with these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel." So Moses is writing these things during the 40 years that Israel is in the desert. Now the timeline, this should be fascinating. When Israel went into the land of Egypt, that was about the year 1876. Now, kids, I just want to make sure you're paying attention to this part. When we're talking about BC, times are going down because we're counting down to the birth of Christ. So 1876 is older. And then they spent 430 years in Egypt, which means that the Exodus would be around the year 1446. We know that because of Exodus 12 that says that they were in there for 430 years. Now, there are, like a lot of things, Christians who debate various aspects of it, people who debate the route of the Exodus, they debate the dating of the book of Exodus itself. I've went ahead with the early date. That is the one that I'm convinced of. I'll let you know a couple reasons for that, but first, look at the timeline on the bottom. So it puts Moses' birth at 1526. Moses was alive for 40 years at the time of the Exodus, there in 1446. Then Israel spends 40 years in the wilderness, and then the timeline carries on. A couple reasons for why you're choosing the earlier date. Now, some Christians are convinced that the Exodus happened about 175 years later. Here's two reasons why we don't hold that view, or at least I don't hold that view. So in Judges 11:26, this is what Jephthah says. He says, while Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Ammon, 300 years, why did you not deliver them within that time? So during the time that he's writing here in Judges, if Israel had actually been in the land for 300 years, and it's the late date, he would be writing this during the reign of Solomon, which wasn't the case. This is at the time of the judges before the monarchy. And then the second reason, in 1 Kings 6:1, it says, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, some good dating there, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, he began to build the house of God. So the Solomon's temple, I'm not sure, I don't think anyone disputes this, was built in 966 BC, so 480 years before that, 1446. All the math checks out. The Bible can be trusted. Now, there are numerous locations in the book of Exodus, 4 primarily. The first one is Egypt. That's where the book starts off. Moses is, once again, from his birth to the time of the Exodus, he has 80 years. But at age 40, he goes and flees to Midian. Midian, he goes to stay with his future father-in-law, Jethro, and stays there for 40 years before turning back to Egypt. So Egypt is still modern-day Egypt. Midian is in modern-day Saudi Arabia. I will pull up a map in a future slide for you to visualize that. Then we have Mount Sinai. Israel stays at Mount Sinai for a little less than a year. And then the wilderness journey to go from Egypt to Mount Sinai takes about 45 days. So those are the 4 locations. Wilderness is obviously very broad. They have many encampments on the way, but it is a short time comparatively, only 45 days. Take a good look at the map that is on here, and then I will highlight a couple things. So this is from the ESV Study Bible, this map here, and it is showcasing the traditional route of the Exodus plus some possible routes. There's actually more routes that scholars debate about. The thing that you should know is that Mount Sinai, let me just make sure I got my clicker working here. This here is the traditional site of Mount Sinai. It's called Jebel Musa. And on the foot of the mountain, there is a Greek Orthodox monastery built by Justinian in, I think it was the year 555 AD. So that's where they believe that God appeared to Moses in the burning bush. So right here on the Sinai Peninsula, Sinai is claimed by Egypt. This is where the traditional view is. But honestly, there's like 5 or 6 different possibilities. And it's not like, there are people who doubt the Bible. really we don't have conclusive knowledge of where the Mount Sinai is. I'm personally convinced it is a more minority view, but I'm personally convinced it's actually here in Midian in Saudi Arabia. But once again, it's important to know that this is the traditional view. If you want to do any tourist sighting, you will go to the Sinai Peninsula. That is the traditional place. Then I also want to highlight the route. Right here in Exodus 13:17, it says, "When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt." So here's what we do know. We know that they left Ramses. All of the route of the Exodus is in Numbers chapter 33. It just details where they started, where they encamped along the way. So that's helpful. If you're wondering, well, if we got so many details, why is there debate? It's because a lot of the places don't have the same name. We're not exactly sure where a lot of those places are. But some of them we are sure, like Ramses, which is in Quantor, Egypt. Modern day. They've done a lot of archaeological things and have conclusively proved that's where Ramses is. So along this side here by the Mediterranean Sea, so you can see Ramses is where they are. Canaan is the land of Israel. This is the land that was promised to Abraham and to their fathers. Now, it doesn't take a genius to know that if you're here and Canaan is here, you probably want to just make a path right here. But you can see that the way of the land of the Philistines is here. This is specifically the way that God told them not to go, lest when they see war, they'll want to return to Egypt. So God took them on a path through the Red Sea. Once again, the traditional viewpoint is they went from Ramses, they crossed the northern tip of this gulf of the Red Sea and came to Mount Sinai, but other views have them crossing this gulf in the Red Sea into Midian. And those are some different views. There's some fascinating documentaries that were just recently made. They're excellent. They're made by Patterns of Evidence. That's what they're called, patternsofevidence.com. They have some, one dedicated to proving the authorship of Moses and talking about early Hebrew. They have one talking about the dating of the book of Exodus, the real Mount Sinai, the Red Sea crossing. Very fascinating things if you want to dig in deeper to the archaeology as well as the geography of that. As far as the structure of the book, it can be broadly divided into two sections. The first half of the book, chapters 1 through 18, details the Exodus from Egypt. And in that, you're going to find a lot of famous Sunday school stories. You've got the burning bush, the 10 plagues, the Passover, you got the Red Sea crossing, and God providing manna from heaven. Then in the second half of the book, which takes place at Mount Sinai, or at the foot of Mount Sinai, you have chapters 19 through 40. And in this section, you have the 10 Commandments, the golden calf incident, as well as the building of the tabernacle. Now, getting into the meat of the book of Exodus, the first thing I want to highlight is a continued theme from Genesis. In Genesis, I talked about how the theme of salvation through judgment starts there. And the prototype is Noah's Ark. How through faith, Noah made an ark that when the flood came, God would save those on the ark through the waters of judgment. And in the same way, Pharaoh commanded that all of the Hebrew boys be thrown into the Nile River. And so in faith, Moses' mom made a basket for him. And in the same type of language as used of the ark, she used pitch as well. And then placed it among the reeds in the Nile River. And Moses ends up being saved through a mini ark through the waters of judgment. Now, there's also a parallel that happens in the time of Jesus. Herod, acting like a wicked Pharaoh, also, when he was tricked by the wise men, wanted to kill every Hebrew male child 2 years and under in Bethlehem. So he was acting like Pharaoh was during that time. But once again, just like Moses was saved, just like Noah was saved, Christ was saved as well through God's intervention. The next story is the 10 plagues. Now, the 10 plagues, once again, are not random. They are not just God thought what would be icky and gross and cause a lot of pain. They were meant to combat the gods of Egypt. We know that from Numbers 33. Look what it says. On their gods also the Lord executed judgment. So there are two reasons for the plagues in Egypt. The first one, given by God here in Exodus 11, is he says, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. God was showing them what blessings and curses looks like. Egypt would receive the plagues, the curses, and Israel, his people, would not be harmed by these plagues. He was showing that Israel is his people and what being under his blessing looks like. And then the second reason is to show judgment on Egypt's gods, to show that he is the true God. He is the one with the power. For example, I'll show 3 for you. Happy was the Egyptian god of the Nile. And so what does God do? Turns the Nile to blood. Take that, Happy. And then Isis, the Egyptian god of medicine and peace. Well, what does he do? He gives them unhealable boils. Can't heal that. And then Ra, the Egyptian sun god. What does he do? Brings darkness over the land. Not in Goshen, though, where Israel was. They did not receive the darkness over the land. Only Egypt did. So God is showing what it's like to be under his blessing and what it's like to be under his curse. And he is showing that he is not like the Egyptian gods. He is sovereign and powerful. The Passover comes from the 10th plague. The 10th plague is the most important of all. It is the one that Jews still celebrate a ceremony today, and us Christians do as well every Sunday when we take the Lord's Supper. So during the Passover, this is what God says in Exodus 12. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So God had promised to kill the firstborn of every person, every child in Egypt. And to show a distinction between Egypt and Israel, he wanted Israel to take on a covenant sign, to show that they were his people. So what he did is he instructed them to take a lamb with no blemish at all, to kill the lamb and put the lamb's blood on the doorposts of your home, and then to eat the lamb's flesh. And what that would do is when the destroyer went from house to house to kill the firstborn of every family, he would see the blood on the doors of the Israelites' home and pass over them, not giving them judgment. And so this has a special significance for us because Jesus Christ is our Passover lamb. Maybe you haven't thought of the parallels before. Maybe you're aware of some of them. John the Baptist called Jesus, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Just like Israel had to kill a lamb, Jesus was the Lamb of God. Without blemish, here's what Peter says, "You are ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot." Christ, not only the Lamb of God, one without blemish. He was killed on the Passover. This is coming from the day before. It says, now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. They cried out, away with him, crucify him. The timing was providential as well. In John 6, Jesus says, Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Just as Israel eats the flesh of the Lamb, so we feast on Christ. And then finally, the blood of Christ, just as it was put over the doorpost to abate judgment. In Romans 5:9, it says, since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. Jesus had to die. His blood had to be shed. That is what secures our redemption. That is what causes God's wrath to pass over from us. Then the Exodus itself. Now, Israel entered the land of Egypt, 70 persons in all. They left with 600,000 men, plus women and children. So definitely over 1 million people, and then they had livestock as well. As they were going out of Egypt, they plundered the Egyptians as God foretold them. You could consider that reparations for hundreds of years of slavery. They were led by God by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. God was leading the way from them. And then as they left Egypt, they came to the Red Sea. And this was the final judgment on the Egyptians. Though Pharaoh let Israel go, God hardened his heart again, and they chased Israel all the way to the Red Sea, up against the sea. Israel walks through on dry land because God caused Moses to split the sea so they could go through on dry land, and then the water comes tumbling down on the Egyptians who were chasing them, leading to a watery grave. Once again, Israel saved through the waters of judgment, and the Egyptians were not. Now, you're going through the desert. The desert is a hot place. There are a total of 0 water fountains. There are no McDonald's on the way. And even if there was McDonald's, you have 600,000 men, plus women and children and livestock. Israel was dependent on a powerful God to make it through there. 45 days in the desert with that crowd. Imagine. So what does God do? One of the things you need is water. He provided water 2 different ways. One time they came to a bitter water, which was difficult to drink. Through a special sign, God made the water sweet. And then another time, God told him, Moses, to strike the rock. You might be thinking, Jeremy, they didn't say strike the rock. He said speak to the rock. That's later in Numbers. The first time he did say strike the rock, and he did. And water came out from the rock. And he also gave them bread from heaven, which is called manna. And he protected them in battle, like against Amalek, when they came out to destroy Israel. So God was a God to Israel. He was their provider. He was their protector. He was watching after them and making sure that he kept his covenant promises. And so they arrive at Mount Sinai in chapter 19, and it is Moses and Aaron alone. Later, Joshua can go up as well, but in the beginning, Aaron and Moses are allowed to go up on the mountain. Israel is not allowed to even touch the mountain. They have to stay at the foot of the mountain. And that is where the next section begins. But before I do, I want to tell you a quick story. In 2018, I was in Washington, D.C., and I went to the Museum of the Bible. Lots of great manuscripts there. Just a fantastic place to spend a day. And this is one of the things that really caught my eyes. Very sad thing. This was one of the Bibles that was given to black slaves in the 1800s. There's only 3 of these Bibles that are known to exist now in the world, and one of them was at the Museum of the Bible. I want to read to you what it says there underneath the Bible. It says, by the way, this is the full name of the Bible. Parts of the Holy Bible selected for use of the Negro slaves in the British West India Islands. Here's what they say. This is written by the Museum of the Bible. The volume is called Holy, but is deeply manipulative. Based on the King James Version, it omits all entries that express themes of freedom. The story of the Exodus, for example, describing the Israelites' escape from slavery in Egypt, is missing. The editors left out entire books and large portions of others. Their selections stressed obedience, submission, and acceptance. So, in this parts of the Holy Bible, they absolutely included the story of Joseph's slavery in Egypt. Hey, accept your lot in life. They included all the passages, which are great Bible verses, by the way. That there is no that you must be obedient to your masters. But they were very selective in what they included, so as to not have an uprising, to make them content where they were. They did not include the story of the Israelite freedom from slavery. They did not include Exodus 21:16, which says, "Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death." A very sad part of North American history, because the story of the Exodus provides great freedom, that God can even take you out of slavery and give you hope. While at Mount Sinai, God makes a Mosaic covenant with Moses and the Israelites. This section can be divided into three. First, you have the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. This deals with the relationship of God to, as well as to people. Then you have the judgments, which comes in Exodus 21 through 23. These are social regulations, dealing with things like murder and things like that, slavery, just dealing with when you're entering the land of Canaan, God is your king. This is how you have a righteous government. And then we have the ordinances in chapters 24 through 31. This is religious regulations and ceremonies. A lot of them are dealing with the building of the tabernacle. I want you to think about what Israel responds, what they say here in Exodus 24:7. Then Moses took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient." Read that in light of the next story, the golden calf incident. How quickly they forget that they will be obedient and do everything that God said. Now, Moses, one of the things that God has in a leader is they act as a mediator between him and people. We saw this with Abraham. He acted as a mediator between Sodom, but there wasn't really righteous people there, so God ended up destroying Sodom. But Moses is a mediator between God and Israel, because Israel commits idolatry in the highest form by crafting a golden calf. See, Moses had gone up on Mount Sinai. I believe it was for 40 days and 40 nights when this happened. They're like, we don't even know if Moses is going to come back. Make us gods. And so they gather up all that gold that they plundered from Egypt, and they fashion under Aaron's leadership as well. He assented to this. They made a golden calf, and they said, "Behold, these are your gods that brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Breaking the first of the two commandments, "You shall have no other gods, and you shall not make a graven image." A despicable sin. But God's reaction first is appropriate. This is how God responds. He says in chapter 32:10, "Let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them." But Moses acts as an intercessor. He stands in between an angry God and people who rightly deserve God's justice. And he appeals to God's reputation and reminds him of his covenant promises. He says, look, if you rescue your people from Egypt, and then you bring them out into the desert and you smite them all, what is the nations going to say about you? And then he says, but you remember your covenant promises that you made to Abraham. He appeals to God's character, to his covenant promises. God wants this to happen. He wants Moses to intercede. And this is how he responds. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken on bringing on his people. Moses successfully interceded. Now, this is not just a story. I hope that this causes you to think of your own Christian walk. Because here's the thing. We can look at stories like the golden calf, and we can get really judgy real fast. A golden calf? Are you kidding me? Who's going to do that? I mean, you guys just saw God. He just parted the Red Sea for you. How are you going to make a golden calf that quickly? I wouldn't do that, we might think. But we're just like Israel. We know God. We've seen God's power in our lives, yet we constantly disregard his law. We constantly disobey him. Even the things we want to do, we end up not doing. We are like faithless Israel. And God has a right to be angry at us. But the good news, like Moses, we have an intercessor. We have someone that mediates for us. 1 Timothy 2:5 says, there is one God and there is one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. I hope you read that with new eyes today. Christ is our mediator. Like Moses, he stands in between us and God and appeals for us. Hebrews 7:25 says, consequently, Jesus is able to save us to the uttermost, those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. We know we have an enemy, Satan. What is he called? He is called the accuser. He accuses us to God, and he has every right to, but if he looks at our lives, we break God's law. But we have, because we are adopted into the family of God, because Christ shed his blood for us, the wrath of God has been appeased. We are now right with God, and Christ can intercede for us. And how great that is. The last section of the book of Exodus deals with the tabernacle. I don't know about you, but when I was a brand new Christian and I was reading through all the instructions about the construction of the tabernacle, it wasn't the best reading. I didn't quite enjoy it as much. But my hope here is to help you to see the beauty of it, to see why this takes up such a large part of the ending of the book of Exodus. First, some facts. This is the size of the tabernacle. It was 30 feet long by 15 feet wide and 15 feet high. Inside, there were numerous items of furniture. It's the furniture that are the important parts that represent something very significant that God had them to build, and the tabernacle houses these. So, for example, inside the holy place, so if you are unfamiliar, outside of this area is the courtyard. You would go through this veil here, or you wouldn't, the priest would, and then you would enter this place here. This is called the holy place. Then there is another veil that has embroidered cherubim on it, and this leads into what is called the most holy place. So inside the holy place, we have these items. We have the altar of incense, which represents our prayers. We have the golden lampstand, which is continually lit, and it symbolizes the tree of life. And then we have the table of the bread of presence. There were 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes of Israel that stayed on there continually. And these were the items that were in the holy place. Only one piece of furniture was in the most holy place, and that was the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the Ark of the Covenant, you had the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, and then the author of Hebrews also lets us know that later Aaron's budded staff as well as manna from heaven was also placed in there. Now looking at the court was much bigger. It was 150 feet long by 75 feet wide. In the court, here's what we have. This is the gate to go into the court. Any Israelite could go into the court, but only the priests could go into the holy place, and only the high priest could go into the most holy place. And not whenever he wanted, only once a year. Now, the items that are in the courtyard, this is the bronze altar for sacrifices. And then after that, just before you hit the tabernacle, you have the bronze basin, which was for ceremonial washings. You also see that there is a distinction of metals from the common courtyard, where it's using bronze, to when you go into the tabernacle and everything is of gold, because that is where God is. Lastly, we have the significance of the tabernacle itself. Here's the thing. If you think about all the bad that happened in Eden, what was the best part first? You might say, well, there was no diseases. That was good. There's no suffering and pain. Hate that. No death. That was good. Want that. But the best part of Eden was that God himself was there. God walked in the cool of the day with Adam and Eve. There was harmonious relationship with God. That is the best thing. And when Adam and Eve sinned, they were driven out of the Garden of Eden. Cherubim were placed blocking the way to the garden, and they are cut off from the presence of God. That is the big problem of the whole Bible. Man is separated from God. Man is alienated from God. How does that get fixed? That is the storyline of the Bible. And in the book of Exodus, we have our first restoration of Eden. Not in its fullness sense, but our first instance of it. Remember, think back again. Put yourself in the shoes of those Israelites in Egypt as slaves. They're not in the land of Israel. The presence of God seems far away. God seems silent. You can hear the stories about the Garden of Eden and God walking with them, but that's just all a distant memory. But God tells the Israelites, he says here under the section where it says restored presence, in Exodus 25:8, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. God, it was restoring his presence. He would not be distant any longer. He would be with them and with them for the rest of the journey. This was a portable temple. This was like a portable mini Eden. There's lots of symbolism of the Garden of Eden all throughout this temple. And God was saying when he dwelled over there with a cloud or with fire by night over the tabernacle, he was saying, I am with you. I am your God. You are my people. I will go with you wherever you go. And that's exactly what he did. And so God's presence remained with the people of Israel in that tabernacle until Solomon finally erected a permanent home in the construction of the temple about 500 years later. And that is the book of Exodus. I will, if anyone has any questions, I will take a couple. No pressure, though. Yes, Mary. So, blemish would be a defect. In a lamb, it might mean has spots, maybe a broken leg, something like that, something that would make it undesirable. When the New Testament refers to Christ as the unblemished lamb, what they're referring to is the fact that Christ was sinless, that he had no sin, that he was the perfect man. Yes, Keith?
I've never heard of the word tabernacle before.
Yeah, so the tabernacle, have you heard of the word temple before?
Yeah.
So the tabernacle was just like the temple, except it was for before Israel had a permanent home. So they were going through the wilderness, and so they had to have one that they could carry with them to bring wherever they went. And so the tabernacle was a portable temple. Any other questions?
On the length of time they spent in Egypt, that doesn't really get covered in Exodus, but it was kind of the setup to it. Are you familiar with the idea that they spent 215 years there, and that the 400 refers back to Abraham?
I've not heard that theory before. So what I was going off of, you're referring to the place where it says 430 years that they spent in Egypt. So it says Exodus 12, let's reread it for everybody's sake. The time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So you're saying that part of that was Egypt and part of it was...
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that people think that way is that some of the genealogies lead them to believe that's true. Moses and Aaron and their sister Miriam, those three are mentioned in three different places as being being 4 generations down from Levi.
Okay, yep.
No, that's pretty close.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, no, there's definitely that's a theory that I have not heard before, so I actually can't comment on it, but it's an interesting one for sure. Yes, Rachel.
Does the word mediator always mean a peacemaker between man and God, or can it be just a peacemaker?
Yeah, it does not have to mean between God and man. We still use the word mediator. Like if you're having a dispute with somebody here in this world with another person, then you would ask for a mediator, somebody to help you to find a resolution. So yeah, it's not meaning specifically about God and man. Okay, thank you very much.